even if you had a small class with 10 students, right? Like there's only one instructor who's sort of the expert, right? So are there other workarounds or other ways that you found to help people engage in deliberate practice without needing another person?
I mean, it's kind of like, how could you train for baseball without another person? There's some things you can do, but no, typically we need other people. And that's the nature of our work, is it's a deeply interpersonal work.
Okay.
And you can practice painting without another person. You can practice music without another person. You can fly without another person. Therapy is an interpersonal gig. So I have done, I've done deliberate practice. I think there's a video on YouTube where I would watch videos of my own work and I would just try to scan how I was feeling internally. And I was trying to build my inner awareness skills and my inner ability, my inner capacity to feel sad or empathic with someone. Because I found that I was veering away. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I would have certain clients, when they would get super sad, I would almost back off. Like I'd get scared, basically, And so I was trying to build my capacity to sit with people who are in extreme distress.
Oh, so you were rewatching to sort of like re-experience those feelings, so you could sort of, whether it's habituate or have new learning, to sort of, so that when you're in that moment again, you are able to recognize what you're feeling, do something with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was able to do that solo, and that was, helpful to some degree. But no, ultimately, I think it's an interpersonal skill, and we need to practice it interpersonally mostly.
Right. So I brought this up when I was talking to Rod Goodyear, because one of my colleagues and I, we developed sort of this prototype for use ChatGPT. I don't know if you ever use their voice function.
Yeah.
Where you could just have a conversation. And it sounds very human.
Yeah.
But we created a custom GPT to practice specific skills. So the idea is that the GPT or the ChatGPT is the client practicing different things. And then we also programmed it so on the back end, it actually gives the person some feedback on what they did, how many times they did it, where were places in the conversation they could have done something differently. Because I think that this was something, I'll say, when I was in graduate school, I think maybe in your program it wouldn't be the same because I wouldn't feel as embarrassed. But when I was in graduate school, I was reading, I read one of the things I remember reading, Judith Beck's CT for Beginners book, which I think is a great book. And it was like, but I didn't have anybody to practice with. And I was too embarrassed to ask any of my, cohort mates, hey, would you practice this with me?
Yeah. So what you designed sounds like a great tool. I mean, it sounds, the students would be very lucky to have that. And so absolutely, I'd have two comments on that.
Yeah.
First of all, when a student is sitting with ChatGPT, it's a relatively neutral, kind of low emotional intensity, right? And you can ask it to maybe simulate high intensity, but there's only so much the student's going to feel it. And with deliberate practice, we want to aim for what's called state-dependent learning, which means that people are practicing in somewhat the same conditions that they're going to perform. And for therapists, that means emotional conditions. And so rehearsing with a real human being, we think will help because it'll just raise their anxiety just a little bit, which is how they're going to need to perform. So that's one. That said, what you're talking about sounds great, especially it's like homework or something like that. However, we are now, entering a world where ChatGPT might be like, well, wait a minute, why do we need these human therapists? We recently did a survey of just 500 random US residents on the internet who said they used AI and they have at least one lifetime incidence of a mental health condition. And half of them said they were going to LLMs for emotional support. Half.
It's just a random sample. I mean, it wasn't
random
ChatGPT users. It was just
random sample. So that here's the link to it's in peer review right now. And we just got positive reviews from the first round. So I would expect it should be published within a few months. So half of them are using it for emotional support. 2/3 of them find it very effective. Of those, a significant portion find it more effective than their human therapist. Now, there might be a bias in the sample because we're surveying people who are using AI already. And so they might just feel very comfortable with AI. So this does not represent all Americans. But it's a heads up that this is coming for our field. That people, and I've heard this anecdotally, I'll talk to friends. If you go to Reddit, you'll see many, many, many examples of this, of people getting real meaningful therapy-like support from ChatGPT or the other LLMs. ChatGPT doesn't want to talk about this. None of the LLMs want to talk about this because, they're not registered or licensed mental health providers. But I can't prove this, but I personally think that ChatGPT is currently the largest provider of mental health support in the country.
Yeah, if you said a single provider,
yeah,
then I think that'd be hard to. I've been trying to think what would compete with it.
And not many people want to. I mean, you're willing to acknowledge this, but many therapists I talk to are like, no, it's a robot. It can't, So I think this is something we should take very seriously. And I think about every day in terms of my trainees. How are we going to help them stay competitive in a future world with robot therapists?
Yeah. And so where have you gotten with that?
I am staying optimistic. There's something, have you heard of Jevons paradox? Jevons paradox is a term that refers, I think it goes back to when the steam engine was originally developed. And there are all these concerns like, oh my gosh, they're making all these machines that are part of the Industrial Revolution, and they're going to take all these jobs away from human beings. And there's going to be no jobs left. And while there was a period of disruption that went on for a little while, what they found over time is actually 100 times more jobs were invented. It's kind of like when the internal combustion engine was invented. It did put a lot of the horse-drawn carriage riders out of business. But then there's all these taxi companies and bus companies and transportation companies. And, there's 100 times more jobs are created. I think that will happen from AI. I think ChatGPT and the other AI providers will actually provide enough limited emotional support to get people open and interested in the idea of therapy. And then I think human therapists, I even have to qualify therapists as human. I think human therapists will be on a treatment team with AI therapists. And AI will provide things that we can't provide, like being available at 2 a.m., like being available 7 days a week for almost free. And then the human therapist will provide the thing the AI can't provide, which is being human.
Right. All right.